broadcasted live. Catch the podcast on Kaya959.co.za.
To get into our top story tonight, we're going to zoom in on Transnet, which has a board with several vacancies. And this, as we've been told, holds a lot of lessons for corporates as well as SOEs. Now, this has been highlighted by Futuregrowth Asset Management, which recently raised the red flag about the inordinate time it is taking to fill 6 vacant positions on the Transnet board, and how these concerns are valid and point to governance issues that should be seriously considered by all boards. Someone who's going to add their voice to this, of course, is a well-respected guest of the show, CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa, Mr. Parmi Natesan. Parmi, welcome to the show.
Good evening, Guguletu.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Parmi Natesan. Great to have you with us once again. I guess first things first, we obviously need to get a lot of clarity on the current position of the board composition at Transnet. Help us paint a picture here and fully understand these 6 vacancies and why it's taken so long to fill.
I think firstly, what we just need to establish is that the founding documents of any organization generally state a range of the board size. So it may say the board will consist of 6 to 12, let's say, individuals, right? So it's not necessarily vacancies per se, but perhaps they feel that 6 therefore is enough, right? And when I say they, I mean government being the shareholder representative of an entity like Transnet. But the thing with this is that business, we know, gets more complex every year. Governance is getting more complex. The public sector has its own challenges. The company itself is already facing certain challenges. And there's also external pressure in the economy, the social environment, the political environment, all of this. And that's why it's so important to have sufficient people on the board. You know, we need vacancies filled, and we need a diversity of skill and experience to be able to really understand the intricacies of the business and make solid business judgment calls. And obviously, the fewer members, the harder it is to do this. We also need enough people on boards to be constituting the board committees. And there we have statutory board committees like the Audit Committee and the Social and Ethics Committee. And then we have other committees like a Risk Committee, a Remuneration Committee, etc. Now, obviously, if there's not enough people, the existing board members are overextended. There may be an independence issue because a certain of these committees should be independent. Now you may have one individual serving on all 4. And then, of course, segregation of duties. I mean, it's not ideal to be having the same people on all the committees.
Not at all. What I'm also keen to understand is that naturally this is a governance issue and raises a lot of alarm, and the time which has extended where we've seen these vacancies still not be filled by raise a lot of concern. If you take a look at the shareholder and of course key stakeholders who need to be raising some alarm here, typically within the government structures and an SOE, whose responsibility does this fall on?
Well, in your normal governance structure, you have a shareholder who elects your board, and then you have your board who oversees management, right? And in the public sector, your shareholder is effectively government, and generally that's represented by your the minister responsible for that entity. And they then should be electing the board members, and those board members then holding management accountable. That's how the structure works. So I would say the buck stops with government being in terms of filling those vacancies.
Got you. What I'm also keen to understand, as you say, this does raise a lot of lessons and concerns for members of corporates as well as other SOEs. And as you've highlighted, not only does the board and its vacancies raise concerns about the remuneration committees and subcommittees be underneath that, but from an executive point of view, can this also hamper a sense of accountability when it comes to operations at the business?
Look, the more diverse a range of skills and expertise and experience you have with the board, the better able they are to hold management to account, right? Because they understand the industry and the intricacies of that business. So they ask questions based on their previous knowledge and experience. So obviously that's why we prefer to have this diverse range in order for management to be held accountable to a wider range of individuals.
Got you. So how best should we consider fixing this? And I guess making sure that this doesn't continue to happen and that corporates and other SOEs are able to learn.
Look, I think vacancies should be filled as a matter of priority. I think it's, in some entities, like in the private sector, generally you have to wait for an AGM for shareholders to vote in board members. However, casual vacancies can be filled in between by by the board itself, just so that we can carry on with the business that the board needs to do. In the public sector, the shareholding minister needs to prioritize filling these vacancies. The other unique issue with the public sector is generally you don't really have staggered rotation of the board. So the existing 6 that are there now, we believe their term comes to an end at some point, all of them at the same time, which that in itself isn't ideal, because generally you would prefer staggered rotation where maybe 2 comes off and 2 new, because you need people with institutional memory, right? Sometimes when you join a board, it can take you a year or 2 just to understand the business. Now you only serve for another year and then you're all gone. And then there's a whole new board, which really isn't an ideal situation. This also results in a succession planning challenge, right? Because succession planning is about having people in place who are sort of in the wings for critical positions. So, for example, who's going to take over as board chair next? And once you know who those people are, you can ensure that those people get trained and groomed effectively, with the current people in place, so that when those people leave, the successors are ready to take that place. Now, if the whole board is leaving at the same time, who do we even put in a succession plan for these key positions like chairman of the board, chairman of audit committee, etc.?
100%, and that's a very valid point that you raised there in terms of the institutional memory and understanding of the organization to allow others to adapt. It also leads me to a question around talent, and some question whether we have effective talent, sufficient talent, and also how we retain some of this talent, especially when it comes to boards. I'm aware that there's certain terms that need to be fulfilled, but diversity on a board is also something that is so critical to make sure that divergent views and openness to various thoughts might also be considered. Your thoughts on this one?
Absolutely. It's very critical, but, I feel there is enough talent out there. I mean, the Institute of Directors has 2 director designations, which we confer, which we then vet candidates, and they go through a lengthy process of training, writing exams, portfolios, interviews, etc. They're bound by our code of conduct. So in that alone, there's a couple of hundred there. And then there's many more that are members of the Institute who are seeing our thought leadership, coming to our training and that sort of thing. So these people, and especially the ones designated, are ready and able and willing to serve. And it's definitely a diverse group. We're seeing more and more women coming through. We're seeing younger people. We're seeing, more and more people of color. So I think the diversity is encouraging. I think the talent is there. The question is how we go about looking for the talent. Because oftentimes in the public sector, you'll see that it's rather political appointments than necessarily opening up the gates wider and saying, let's see who's out there that has the skill to be able to serve here.
100%. Is there a way within which we also need to be ensuring that directors themselves continue to keep up with the latest developments, whether it's sustainability, ESG, I beg your pardon, or even other sectorial demands that actually speak to the companies that they sit on the boards of? Is this a consistent, ongoing professional development that we need to look into?
So continued professional development is absolutely critical for any profession. I think the unique challenge with directorship is that at the moment there is no license to practice. So a director doesn't have to belong to the institute in order to serve as a director. The benefit, of course, to them belonging to an organization like the Institute of Directors is that one, will be kept up to date with us sending through alerts, having webinars, conferences, training, that sort of thing. But 2, they also have the members of ours who are designated, so the ones who have either chartered director or certified director designations, they have to do CPD annually, which means they're required to keep up to date in order to retain their designation.
100%. Parmi, truly appreciate this, and I think it's also encouraging for even those who might not be at a directorship level yet, but to fully understand what will be required of them, how to prepare themselves, and also how to, be leaders of governance, really, which is what we need as clear authorities. So we certainly hope that through your endeavors and initiatives, that this ongoing cycle of adequate succession planning does continue. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
That's Parmi Natesan, who's the CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa. And I also hope that this conversation falling on the right ears, right? It's significant that an asset management firm has raised their concerns. As we hear, the Institute of Directors in South Africa also raising their observations of this and lessons to learn. But ultimately, moves need to be made. So the shareholders, Department of Public Enterprises, many others also need to be considered to make sure that we adequately understand the role and the function of boards and, of course, instill them accordingly.
If you missed it live, catch the podcast on Kaya959.co.za.